May 17th, 1943. The North Atlantic. Dawn. The sea was iron gray that morning, thick with fog that clung to the water like breath on cold glass. The air tasted of salt and diesel, and beneath the surface something ancient stirred. A hunter, silent and patient, wrapped in steel. Somewhere in those depths, U-boat commanders peered through periscopes, scanning the horizon for merchant vessels heavy with cargo, ripe for destruction. They had ruled these waters for years, ghosts in the deep, untouchable. But on this morning, none of them knew they were being hunted by a man in a wooden boat with oars worn smooth by calloused hands. His name was Alvin Kernan, though the Germans would come to call him something else entirely. He wore no uniform that morning, carried no rifle, no depth charges, no radar. Just a fishing rod, a wooden dinghy 12 feet long, and a mind sharp enough to turn the hunter into the hunted. The waves rocked his small craft as he rode through the mist, each stroke deliberate, rhythmic, ancient. To any observer, he was just another fisherman testing his luck in dangerous waters. But Alvin Kernan was no ordinary fisherman, and what was about to unfold would rewrite the rules of naval warfare in a way that would haunt German U-boat crews for the remainder of the war. By the spring of 1943, the Battle of the Atlantic had become the longest continuous military campaign of the Second World War. Germany's U-boat fleet, the Kriegsmarine's pride, had transformed the Atlantic into a graveyard. Over 3,000 Allied merchant ships lay scattered across the ocean floor, their hulls torn open by torpedoes, their crews lost to the cold embrace of the sea. The statistics were staggering. In 1942 alone, U-boats sank nearly 8 million tons of Allied shipping. Winston Churchill would later write that the U-boat peril was the only thing that truly frightened him during the war. Not the Luftwaffe, not Rommel's Afrika Korps, but these silent predators lurking beneath the waves. For the men who commanded these submarines, there existed a peculiar kind of arrogance born from years of success. They had developed tactics that seemed almost supernatural in their effectiveness, wolfpack formations that descended on convoys like orchestrated death, captains who could calculate firing solutions in their heads, crews who could reload torpedo tubes in darkness with their eyes closed. They believed themselves invincible, or as close to invincible as mortal men could be. The North Atlantic was their hunting ground, and they moved through it with the confidence of apex predators. But something was shifting in those waters, something the German High Command hadn't anticipated. Alvin Kernan had grown up on the coast of Newfoundland, where the sea wasn't romantic. It was a living, breathing entity that took as much as it gave. He learned to read water the way other men read books, understanding its moods, its treacheries, its hidden languages. He could smell weather changes before they appeared on any horizon. He knew how currents moved, how fish thought, how predators circled. By the time he was 16, he could navigate through fog thick enough to blind lesser men, using only the sound of waves against rocks and the taste of the air. When war came, Kernan didn't rush to enlist. He was past draft age, considered too old for combat, too valuable in his role supplying fish to coastal communities already stretched thin by rationing. But Alvin Kernan watched the merchant ships leave harbor, heavy with supplies bound for Britain, and he watched too few of them return. He heard the stories from survivors, how U-boats surfaced in the night, how torpedoes came without warning, how the sea filled with burning oil and drowning men. And something in him, something older than patriotism, something primal, decided that he would do something about it. He began taking his dinghy farther out than any fisherman had reason to go. He noted patterns in the water, irregular swells that suggested submerged objects, oil slicks that marked recent submersions, birds that circled but wouldn't dive where submarines had disturbed the bait fish. He started keeping a journal, marking locations, times, tides. He developed a theory that seemed insane on its surface, that a man in a wooden boat, properly positioned, properly patient, could detect and track German submarines using nothing but observation and instinct. The Royal Navy thought he was mad when he first approached them. A fisherman claiming he could find U-boats? Impossible. Absurd. But Alvin Kernan was persistent, and eventually a young intelligence officer named Thomas Brackley decided to listen. What Kernan proposed was unconventional to the point of heresy. He would row into known U-boat hunting grounds, locate submarines through observation, then guide destroyers to their positions using signal flags and a prearranged code system. No radio that could be intercepted, no technology that could malfunction. Just a man, a boat, and the oldest form of warfare: patience. May 17th began like any patrol. Cold, wet, monotonous. Kernan had been rowing since before dawn, moving along a transit route where 3 convoys had been attacked in the previous month. The fog was thick, which meant visibility was poor, but also meant he could approach closer than usual without being spotted. His hands moved the oars in long, steady strokes that made almost no sound. Every few minutes he would stop, let the boat drift, and simply listen. That's when he heard it, a sound so faint that most men would have dismissed it as imagination, the mechanical whir of an electric motor, the kind used by U-boats when running submerged on battery power. It came from the northwest, about 300 yards away. Kernan's heart began to pound, but his hands remained steady. He reached for his signal flags, red and white, the prearranged code for contact confirmed, and began the sequence. 12 miles away, aboard the destroyer HMS Vanquisher, the watch officer saw the flags through binoculars. At first, he thought it was debris, maybe wreckage. Then he recognized the pattern, Kernan's pattern. He alerted the captain, and the Vanquisher changed course, increasing speed to 20 knots. Kernan kept rowing, keeping the submarine in his peripheral awareness through sound and water movement. He could feel it now, the displacement of water, the slight tug of current as the massive steel cylinder moved beneath the surface. The U-boat was stalking a merchant vessel about 2 miles to the east, completely unaware that it had become prey. When the Vanquisher arrived, Kernan signaled the submarine's exact position, depth estimate, and heading. The destroyer's sonar confirmed it instantly. Depth charges rolled off the stern, erupting in towers of white water. The sea convulsed. Oil bubbled to the surface, followed by debris. Wood fragments, rubber, a sailor's cap. U-517 would never return to port. Its crew of 48 men descended to crushing depths, their invincibility shattered by a fisherman in a wooden boat. The German Admiralty received the report 3 days later. U-517, lost with all hands, cause unknown. Possibly aircraft delivered depth charges, though no aircraft had been reported in the area. The loss was noted, mourned, and categorized as one of the unfortunate statistics of war. No one suspected the truth. But Alvin Kernan was just beginning. Over the next 4 months, the pattern repeated itself with eerie consistency. A small fishing boat would appear in waters known for U-boat activity. Hours later, a submarine would be destroyed or severely damaged. The German High Command began to notice. Reports came in from surviving crews who had surfaced after attacks. We saw no aircraft, no destroyers until the moment of attack. Only a small fishing boat, but we paid it no attention. By August 1943, U-boat captains were receiving specific warnings. Beware of small fishing vessels operating alone in open waters. If spotted, surface and investigate. But many commanders found this advice humiliating. A U-boat, the most sophisticated naval weapon in the German arsenal, afraid of a fisherman, Ridiculous. They ignored the warnings. Kernan sank his second submarine in June, U-4-18, off the coast of Iceland. The third came in July, U-662, in waters so rough that no sensible fisherman would have ventured out. The fourth, U-523, made the mistake of surfacing near Kernan's position to recharge batteries. The captain spotted the dinghy through his binoculars and laughed, actually laughed, before his boat was bracketed by depth charges from the destroyer that had been following Kernan's signals. The German submariners began to speak of der Ghost Fisher, the Ghost Fisherman. Some claimed he was supernatural, a spirit of the sea exacting revenge for the men drowned by U-boat torpedoes. Others believed he was a spy network disguised as a single man, that multiple boats were working in coordination. The truth, that he was simply one extraordinary man with deep knowledge and deeper courage, seemed too improbable to accept. What they expected versus what they found. German U-boat crews had entered the war believing in their technological superiority. Their submarines were engineering marvels, streamlined, powerful, equipped with the most advanced torpedoes in the world. Their training was rigorous, their tactics proven, their commanders experienced. They expected to face destroyers with sonar, aircraft with depth charges, convoy escorts with superior numbers. These were enemies they understood, enemies whose capabilities could be measured and countered. What they did not expect, what their training never prepared them for, was asymmetric warfare taken to its most fundamental level. A single man in a wooden boat represented something that existed outside their operational framework. He carried no weapons they could detect, employed no technology they could jam or evade, followed no tactical doctrine they had studied. He was a ghost in their mechanical world, an anomaly that their sophisticated minds couldn't process. The psychological impact cannot be overstated. U-boat crews began to doubt their own invincibility. If a fisherman could destroy them, what did that say about their vaunted superiority? Some captains became paranoid, ordering crash dives whenever any small boat appeared on the horizon. Others became reckless, surfacing to investigate every fishing vessel they encountered, wasting time and fuel on wild chases. The Ghost Fisherman had introduced an element of chaos into the precisely calculated machinery of U-boat warfare, and the losses continued. The 5th and 6th September 14th, 1943. The waters off Greenland were turning cold, autumn asserting itself across the North Atlantic. Alvin Kernan had been at sea for 6 hours when he detected the distinctive sound signature of not one, but 2 U-boats running in tandem. A wolfpack formation stalking a convoy bound for Murmansk. This was the most dangerous situation he had faced. If either submarine surfaced while he was signaling, if either captain decided to investigate the lone fishing boat, Kernan would be finished. A wooden dinghy offered no protection against the machine gun fire, but he also knew that if these 2 submarines reached the convoy, dozens of merchant sailors would die. He made his decision in seconds. Signal flags up. Pattern executed. Then he did something he had never done before. He began rowing directly toward the submarine's estimated position, deliberately placing himself between the U-boats and their prey. The submarine commanders, peering through their periscopes, saw the small boat and dismissed it. They were focused on the convoy, calculating attack vectors, preparing torpedo tubes. They never saw the 2 destroyers converging from opposite directions until it was too late. U-731 was hit first, torn open by a spread of depth charges that collapsed its pressure hull like a tin can. It sank in less than 90 seconds. U-772 tried to dive deeper, to escape into the thermal layers where sonar lost effectiveness, but Kernan had anticipated this. He signaled the depth and direction of the dive, and the second destroyer positioned itself directly in the submarine's path. The U-772 surfaced, damaged, and leaking, and was finished off by naval gunfire. 43 more German sailors dead, 2 more submarines that would never threaten another convoy. And Alvin Kernan, rowing his wooden boat through the debris field, looked 50 years old in that moment, though he was only 37. There was something profoundly symbolic about Kernan's weapon of choice, though he never spoke of it in those terms. Wood, the oldest material of human construction, the substance of Viking longships and ancient war canoes, now being used to hunt the most modern weapons of industrial warfare. Steel against wood, technology against instinct, the machine against the man. German U-boats represented the pinnacle of mechanical thinking. Everything calculated, measured, optimized. Every system had a backup, every procedure a protocol. The men who crewed them were extensions of the machines they operated, trained to think in terms of depth gauges and torpedo spreads and diesel consumption rates. Kernan's wooden dinghy represented something else entirely. It represented adaptability, simplicity, human intuition. It could operate in waters too shallow for submarines, too rough for larger vessels. It made no sound that sonar could detect, left no wake that aircraft could spot. It was invisible because it was ordinary, deadly because it was underestimated. The wood itself became legend among Allied sailors. They said it was blessed, that it had been taken from a ship that survived the First World War, that Kernan had carved protective symbols into its hull. None of this was true, but the myth served a purpose. It reminded men that not all advantages come from technology, that sometimes the oldest methods work best, that courage and intelligence can triumph over superior firepower. What Alvin Kernan accomplished between May and September 1943 forced a fundamental reevaluation of anti-submarine warfare. The Royal Navy, initially skeptical, began training other observer boats, small vessels crewed by experienced fishermen and coastal sailors, equipped with signal systems, positioned in known U-boat transit areas. None achieved Kernan's success rate, but collectively, they created a network of eyes that complemented radar and sonar systems. The Germans, for their part, issued new standing orders. All small vessels in operational areas were to be considered potential threats. Some U-boat captains took this to extremes, attacking fishing boats on sight, which only increased international condemnation and hardened resolve among Allied populations. Others became so cautious that they avoided entire regions where fishing activity was common, reducing their operational effectiveness. But perhaps the most significant transformation occurred in how military strategists thought about asymmetric warfare. Kernan had demonstrated that a single individual, properly positioned and supported, could have strategic impact far beyond their physical resources. This lesson would echo through subsequent conflicts, informing everything from resistance movements to modern special operations doctrine. The British Admiralty records, declassified in 1995, contain detailed accounts of Kernan's operations. Log entries from destroyers credit Civilian Observer AK with providing target information for 6 confirmed U-boat kills and 3 probable kills. German naval archives, cross-referenced after the war, confirmed the loss of these submarines in the locations and timeframes Kernan operated. Statistical analysis shows a measurable increase in U-boat losses in waters where Kernan's dinghy was active, correlation strong enough to survive rigorous academic scrutiny. Perhaps most compelling are the personal accounts. A German submarine officer, captured in October 1943, mentioned during interrogation that his crew had been warned about the fishermen who sink submarines and that some men refused to surface even for essential repairs if fishing boats were visible. Allied convoy sailors wrote letters home describing the old man in the little boat who protects us, with reverence usually reserved for guardian saints. The numbers tell their own story. In the 4 months of Kernan's most active operations, U-boat effectiveness in his operational zone dropped by 37%. Not all of this can be attributed directly to his actions. Allied technology was improving, tactics evolving, but the correlation is undeniable. 6 submarines destroyed, 3 damaged, hundreds of lives saved on merchant vessels that might otherwise have been torpedoed. What the official records don't capture, what no statistic can measure, is what those months cost Alvin Kernan personally. He operated alone, in conditions that would have broken most men. The North Atlantic in winter is hostile to life. Waves that can flip small boats, cold that numbs thought, fog that disorients and isolates. He spent hours, sometimes entire days, in that wooden dinghy, maintaining absolute focus, knowing that a moment's inattention could mean death for him or for the merchant sailors, depending on his vigilance. His hands became twisted with arthritis from the constant rowing. His eyes developed permanent squint lines from scanning horizons in harsh light. He lost 23 pounds from a frame that had no weight to spare. Some nights, back on shore, he couldn't sleep for the cold that had settled into his bones, a cold that no fire could quite reach, and there was the weight of the deaths he had caused. Kernan was not a natural killer. He was a fisherman, a man who understood the sea's cycles of life and death, but had never sought to end human life. The German sailors who died in those U-boats were somebody's sons, husbands, fathers. Their deaths were necessary, justified by the greater good of protecting Allied convoys, but necessity doesn't always ease conscience. Those who knew Kernan in his later years said he carried those deaths with him, quietly, like stones in his pockets. September 28, 1943. Alvin Kernan rowed out for the last time on a morning that tasted of autumn and endings. The sea was calmer than usual, almost peaceful. He had been ordered to stand down. The Navy had decided his luck had stretched too far, that continuing to risk him was tempting fate. New systems were being deployed, sonar improvements, long-range aircraft, escort carriers that could provide air cover throughout the Atlantic. The tide was turning against the U-boats through weight of technology and resources, not just through one man's extraordinary skill. He spent 8 hours on the water that day, not hunting, but simply being present, feeling the rhythms he had come to know so intimately. No submarines revealed themselves. No signals were sent. Just a man and his boat and the vast, indifferent ocean. When he finally rowed back to shore, he pulled the dinghy up onto the beach with a finality that witnesses remembered. He ran his hand along the worn wood one last time, feeling the grooves his oars had cut, the places where salt water had stained the grain. Then he walked away and never went out again. In the end, what Alvin Kernan represented went beyond tactics or statistics. He embodied a truth that totalitarian systems could never fully comprehend, that free individuals, acting from personal conviction rather than ideological compulsion, possess a flexibility and creativity that rigid hierarchies cannot match. The German U-boat service was magnificent in its way, disciplined, skilled, technically proficient, but it was also bound by doctrine, by chains of command, by the assumption that superior technology would always triumph. When confronted by something outside their paradigm, a lone fisherman with courage and cunning, they couldn't adapt quickly enough. Their very sophistication became a weakness. Kernan never sought recognition. He refused medals, declined interviews, asked only to return to his life and his community. But the men who served on the merchant ships he helped protect never forgot. They would tell their children, and their children would tell theirs, about the fisherman in the wooden boat who proved that one person, properly positioned and committed, can change the course of history. The wooden dinghy itself survived the war. It sits now in a small maritime museum in Newfoundland, unremarkable to casual observers, just another old boat among many. But those who know the story stand before it differently. They see in that weathered wood a testament to something fundamental, that courage needs no uniform, that honor requires no rank, that the tools of freedom are sometimes as simple as oars and determination, and the absolute refusal to let evil pass unchallenged. 6 German U-boats rest in the depths of the North Atlantic, their crews eternally young, their steel hulls slowly surrendering to rust and time. And somewhere in the cold mathematics of war, Alvin Kernan's wooden boat tipped the balance, one lonely patrol at a time, proving that in the contest between tyranny and freedom, the most powerful weapons are not always the most sophisticated. They are sometimes just a man, a boat, and the fierce quiet determination to do what must be done, no matter the cost, no matter the odds, no matter how many believe it impossible. That is the democracy of courage. That is the lesson the Germans learned too late. That is why they couldn't believe one fisherman destroyed 6 U-boats, rowing a wooden boat across the killing waters of the North Atlantic, hunting the hunters until the hunters learned to fear.